My family and I, we have a playlist of songs that we just call Road Trip. And whenever we're going on a long road trip, it is the playlist that just plays in our car. And it's a lot of fun, upbeat songs. They're the songs, you roll the windows down and you just belt out at the top of your lungs. Traveling music is typically like that, isn't it? It's the upbeat songs. It's songs that lifts our spirits. It's songs that make us think about the destination that we're going to. And it's just that music that like lifts us up as we are on a long journey. From Psalm 120 to Psalm 134, there are 15 Psalms that are known as the Psalms of Ascent. If you're following along in the Daily Walk Bible reading schedule, maybe you're listening to the Daily Walk podcast, you will begin reading the Psalms of Ascent this week. The Psalms of Ascent were traveling songs. They were sung by worshipers as they were journeying from wherever they lived throughout the land of the Bible towards Jerusalem to ascend up on the top of Mount Zion to go to the temple to worship God. Maybe the worshiper was coming for some feast or festival, and as they traveled and they approached Jerusalem, ascending up to the temple, these are the psalms that they would sing. And as I think about traveling music, as I think about my road trip playlist and the upbeat music that is there, and then I read the very first of these Psalms of Ascent, Psalm 120, it's not what I expected. In fact, it's quite the opposite of what I would expect. So Psalm 120, the first couple of verses, thinking about the worshiper who's been traveling, maybe for days, maybe for weeks, getting close to worshiping God at the temple. And this is the first two verses of the first psalm. I call on the Lord in my distress, and He answers me. Save me, Lord. Save me from lying lips and deceitful tongues. It's not what I would expect to think about a worshiper who's been traveling for weeks to come to the temple. And the first thing that he says is that we need to be saved from lying lips and deceitful tongues. But the psalmist goes on at verse 3, what will He do to you, and what more besides, you deceitful tongue? He will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows, with burning coals of the broom bush. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, and that I live among the tents of Kedar. At verse 5 and 6, the psalmist actually uses two geographic references, Meshech and Kedar. Meshech is likely referring to a geographic area that's on the far northeast of the region where the people would have dwelt. So some suggest it's even as far northeast outside of Jerusalem as modern-day Russia. And Kedar would most likely be referring to a region far southeast away from Jerusalem. So the psalmist is saying that we dwell, the people of God are dwelling in these regions, and he uses these geographic barriers as far north as we know and as far south as we know. And he says we're living among these pagan people, these pagan nations. And these people, they're known, they have lying lips and deceitful tongues. And sort of begs the question for me, what kind of lies do they tell? What kind of deceit is coming from their tongues? Well, as you read verse 6 and 7, we get a little bit of a clue as to what kind of lies the people that the Israelites are living among are telling. Verse 6, too long have I lived among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. So the lies that these people are telling, the people that the Israelites are living among and are escaping as they are going to Jerusalem to worship God, the lies that they are telling have something to do with hating peace and loving war. Division and hostility and hatred and conflict and in a godless society are the antithesis of those who come to the temple to worship the God of the Bible and are those who are for peace. So the psalmist says, in this pagan world, there are those with lying lips who love war, conflict, and hostility. And as we come to the temple, we come to a God of peace, loving peace. Reading Psalm 120, I fear that in our world, very little has changed. The lies that we are told in our culture, I think are the very same. Divide, create hate, foster division. That gets your side, your party, your message, your position out in a prominent place. Our culture, I think, loves conflict. It creates hostility. It creates division. And we as Christians live in a world where we hear the very same message that they were hearing as far north as Meshech and as far south as Kedar. Divide and conquer. And yet, we as Christ followers who worship God are reminded with the psalmist that we should be people who are for peace. Psalm 120 verse 7, I am for peace. And I think that gets us to a really important question that I've been just reflecting as I read Psalm 120. When people look at my life, when people look at our lives as individual Christians, or they look at the church that's living in a culture, in a society that fosters and promotes division and conflict and hatred, and as people look at us, do they see people who are buying into the lie, creating division and conflict and hatred, and fostering that? Or do they look at us and see people who love peace, who are for peace? It was Jesus who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." Oh, that the world would look at the children of God today and see us not as a catalyst for division and hate and conflict, but they would look at us and see that we are people for peace. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace. I am for peace. May Psalm 120 be true of us today.